what I was suggesting, that at least some form of accommodation of the opposition's demand, including at least a cabinet not headed by the incumbent PM Prime Minister would be an option, or therefore another election. A likely scenario is a non-inclusive election that Bangladesh is going to experience. I wish that I'm wrong, but as of today, that's what it looks like.
Thank you. General?
Thank you, Chairman. My first scenario is that Prime Minister Sina will try and push towards a one-party election with disastrous consequences for the country, because if she does that, then the country will move in the path of instability, because the post-election violence is going to be even higher than the pre-election violence. The second option that I see is that if she finds it absolutely difficult to push towards the one-party election, which is her first desire, then she will probably ask the President to declare a state of emergency by which she can stall the elections, buy more time for herself, and perhaps think that she can build up on the opposition and civil society to soften the storm, and then come back to elections maybe after a year or a year and a half. The third option that I see is that the level of violence goes so high that the military reluctantly is sucked into the process to restore some bit of stability in the country and provide security to its citizens. But that is the third option that I see. But in total, the current government's stand is trying to solve the problem doesn't seem to be apparent, because Prime Minister in the last couple of days in forming the so-called interim government has shown that she does not really care about what sort of accommodation is needed to solve the problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sutton, let me ask you, having heard the two comments there, what do you think the U.S. and the world's response ought to be, either in advance of the election or afterwards, depending on which option occurs?
Well, in the coming weeks and months, just because the leadership of the Awami League so far has not heeded the warning that so many people have given, doesn't mean the message shouldn't continue to be delivered. I think at some point, Sheikh Hasina will have to come to terms with the reality that if she forces through a one-party government, that it will only lead to unended, open-ended protests which will put at stake everything that they want to do. She may not realize it today, but she eventually will have to realize it. The question is, will it be too late by the time she realizes it? So, in any case, I think the message just needs to go again and again and again. She does not have within her own cabinet and government enough people telling her what to do.
Thank you. My time's expired. The gentlelady from California, recognized for 5 minutes. That's white. I apologize. Yeah. Somewhere.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kind of the general thread that has been common through each of your testimonies has been your pessimism that a fair election and an open election, as well as your agreement that if this does not occur, that the post-election violence is likely to occur. And if you can tell me a little bit about that post-election violence, who is the target? Based on scenarios that you're talking about, what constituencies are targeted in that scenario?
The violence that is anticipated is the post-election violence. If you look back in 2001 and the previous elections, largely the first is the religious minorities and then ethnic minorities. They become a target of all these attacks that we are seeing previously. In case of an election, if it is a non-inclusive election or unilateral election, however we identify it, definitely it would be the opposition activists, political activists, two different types. But even before we reach to that kind of a situation, post-election situation, the election itself would be very violent if this is a non-inclusive election, because the opposition would tend to not only call for boycott, they will try to resist, and hence the violence will spread. And I'm afraid that this violence might not stay within the boundaries of Bangladesh border. That is the most worrying part. And given the history of Bangladesh, of the Islamist militancy, a left-wing radicalism present. All these things are recipe for disaster. At this point, those are the ones that need to be taken into account as well.
This time, the political violence in the post-election period is not only going to be resisting the government by the opposition, it will be a question of existence of the opposition forces within the country. There have been statements given out by members of the current government that this is the last election between what they call pro-forces and anti-forces. So it is not going to be a political process of protest, but it is going to be a fight for existence of forces which are not included within the government. I also see that the level of protest can go so violent that there will be widespread loss of life and property in the country. And this has ramifications of spillover beyond the borders of Bangladesh. And Bangladesh, which is so closely bordering with India state, and the level of violence that exists in the fenced border between India and Pakistan, where India and Bangladesh, where Indian border guards regularly kill Bangladeshi citizens, it is likely that the spillover impacts will have a tremendous amount of negative impact on the Indian state and the Indian side. I also see impacts on minorities, both religious minorities and ethnic minorities. So therefore, it is going to become extremely fragile and volatile in the post-election period.
Thank you, Mr. Sifton. If in your answer you can also include your thoughts or your assessments of how the India-Bangladesh relationship is currently, especially as we're moving into this period.
Well, first, about the election being unfair, it's not even necessary that the election be unfair for the purposes. Suffice it to say, if the election is run by a government which is not bipartisan, multi-partisan, it will be perceived to have been unfair, and that's all that really counts. There will be protests, even if the election was run fully, fairly and clear. So it's really about perceptions. Second, about the violence that would occur, who would be targeted. I think it's important to understand that a lot of the violence during hotels is not directed. Innocent people can be caught up during hotels. Many victims are ordinary civilians who are just going about their business trying to get around from point A to point B. It depends on what time of day it is. There are a lot of factors there. But it really is important to understand it's not necessarily violence directed at particular forces, but rather widespread chaos where loss of life will be high. It's also important to recognize that it's not just political forces who get targeted. The security forces themselves get targeted. And although they have a long track record of abuse, they also are killed during this violence. Ordinary police officers are killed. As far as the India-Bangladesh relationship goes, it's a very complex one, and I think it's full of, there are a lot of misperceptions about what India wants. It's very difficult to know exactly what India wants. But the important thing is for India to play a constructive role and not back a winner or decide things like that, but to insist that a process be run that mitigates and lessens the likelihood of widespread chaos and violence. That's the most important thing. Not to pick a winner, but to mitigate and lessen the likelihood of massive violence and human rights.
Thank you very much, gentleman's comments. Sorry for the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Rafael, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate it. Moving in and out of meetings, as you well know. A couple questions to bring you to get answers and confirm it all. Bangladesh has had a growing extremist move pushing towards Islamic policies to be implemented. In that process, how likely is it that we would see civil strife between secular and religious groups to the extent that we've seen in some Middle Eastern, Egypt, other places where this is a growing problem? In your opinion, is that a growing problem? If so, as was just mentioned in your testimony just a second ago about religious minorities, I'd like to get your ideas, all three of your ideas.
The conflict between the secularist and Islamist forces, particularly in the past years, we have seen the rise of Islamist forces in Bangladesh. Past in the decades, we have seen that. However, I would not say that it has reached to a point that there will be a conflict as we have seen systematically. It is my understanding, and my understanding based on my research and others, that there will be a growing tension, and that tension is already present in the case of government. But all other political uncertainty may contribute to this kind of situation. That is a worry for us. By itself, it is not going to transform into conflict between Islamists and secularists. But if there is continued uncertainty, violence, and political situation, instability within the political situation, that might contribute to that kind of a conflict increasing. But in short term, I don't see that becoming a major element. So it would remain constantly, it would remain as a reminder of Bangladesh is, I would say, the issue of identity is there, of course, the political ideological differences are there, and over a period it has grown, it might contribute.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. What I would like to say, what I said in the beginning, I emphasize again, any state of instability within the country by running a one-party election that the government plans now will have created a space for non-state actors and extremist forces to thrive. And we already see some early signs of that in the form that there has been resurgence of small splinter terrorist organizations which are surfacing in the last couple of months, were completely not present in the scene before. We also see that there has been impact of the returned migrant workers in the country who bring a different kind of ideology of Islam back to Bangladesh, which is based on the principles of Sufi Islam, and there is a sudden clash of Sufi Islam and the Wahhabi brand of Islam that comes back with migrant workers. We also see the impacts without solid proof of some Middle Eastern NGO money coming into Bangladesh and having this impact. We see that there has been a marginalization of people at the grassroots and non-delivery of services by the state to its own citizens and people. So therefore, the space has been created by that kind of a state of what I call the Hamas impact, where the state does not exist, the non-state actors exist. Therefore, that kind of a situation is also bringing the specter of Islamic forces coming into the play and creating more space for themselves. But I don't really see the kind of play that we've seen in the Middle East or in the Arab Spring coming to Bangladesh anytime soon. But I see that there will be a resurgent forces of Islamic elements coming into the fore if the government persists with the one-party election and destabilizes the country.
Yeah, I think it's a question of what it means to thrive. There's thriving and then there's thriving. It would be a mistake if we're in a situation in which established political forces are so weak that they cease to exist and there's a vacuum that can only be filled by radical Islamist groups which suddenly come on the scene. That's not going to happen. Two established political entities, whatever happens, are going to remain on the scene for some time. What will happen with this thriving that the other witnesses are talking about doesn't necessarily mean thriving politically, but the bigger fear is that there are radical groups which would ally themselves with the established political groups would ally themselves with radical groups in order to be political.
But could we also, in your testimony, could you be giving more of a Western thought of what thriving politically is and what maybe thriving that they're mentioning in the destabilization in an environment that is, I mean, where do we think of economy is?
They're not going to win an election.
Right, well, but they don't have to.
be
And
dangerous.
and that's because you're setting up, so I think sometimes we look at that as the sphere of us looking at, from American policy eyes, that we look at it in terms of what we believe, through elections and whatever. They're talking about, it's interesting to hear the two, the economy here, the two answers, that there is a problem from our perception and the perception on the ground. So that's Mr. Chairman, I think that's something that, if my time is over, I think that is something that I think has infiltrated this region for a long time, is understanding the groundwork on definitional issues and things that we can work on, from an American perspective and a foreign policy perspective, and also from the indigenous perspective as well. So I appreciate you guys here, and thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen, for these comments, and the gentleman's comments inspired. The gentlelady from New York, Ms. Nate, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Madam Member. As we all know, Bangladesh is an important partner for the United States, both as a strategic geographical ally and as a nation that yearns for political and cultural tolerance, values that here in America we work tirelessly to promote abroad. My first question concerns accidents in manufacturing sites like Rana Plaza and Treasury Garments, reflecting a system of workers' protection and labor standards that require improvement. Mr. Sifton has outlined the need for government institutionalized labor reform, like the formation of unions in his written testimony. How can the United States facilitate the explicit writing and passage of such reform? And what are some other avenues through which we can incentivize real and quantitative labor reform?
So what's going on right now with the GSP roadmap to return Bangladesh to get a GSP is the best leverage to get the legal reforms and institutional reforms to Bangladesh Department of Labor to the labor law itself. The fact of the matter is the federations on the ground and the other institutions, labor rights organizations, know fully well exactly what's wrong with Bangladesh's labor law and what needs to be fixed. They've written memos on it with recommendations. It's just a question of getting those political changes made to the law and getting the Department of Labor in Bangladesh to make institutional changes to make those labor law provisions real so that the workers are actually protected. But all of that will be put at risk if there's a political change. And that's why this is a serious moment.
Bangladeshi labor standards have a lot of questions to be answered. And in this, I suggest that our international friends and partners, particularly the United States and the bigger markets where Bangladeshi goods go, particularly the ready-made garments, there has to be also a positive kind of engagement, both on a public and private sector involvement with our industry in Bangladesh. So I'm calling for the US government to engage Bangladesh and its industry. I'm also calling for the US private sector, the retailers, the big Walmarts of the world, to come forward and engage Bangladesh effectively and positively. So there must be a bipartisan kind of effort in trying to look at the problem and solving the problem. The labor standards are in a very sorry state. We need labor law reforms. We need the federations to come and play an effective role. But the existing laws that exist within the country are also very laxly implemented. So we need better governance by the government to implement the existing laws so that the existing laws also are not bypassed by the people and the industry. And we don't want to see the kind of crony capitalism where industrialists close to the government power can do things and go about doing things with impunity. Thank you.
It is largely a matter of shared responsibility. What happens in Bangladesh, the ready-made garment sector, for example, is a result of private entrepreneurship. They have benefited from this lax administrative and labor law, but it is time to utilize those, implement those, and more importantly, it cannot be done only from within the country, given that it is largely from the export sector. There has to be some commitment from outside, and here I see the international community, particularly the United States and the European Union, even the European Union is the largest market of ready-made garments. There should be a positive engagement. Penalizing is not going to help at this moment. More positive engagement is necessary not only at the government level, but at the civil society level, and also with those who own the industry, the entrepreneurs, the main contributors, and the laborers, who basically who have built this industry from absolutely nothing.
Thank you so much.
Generally, we'll go to the second round now, and I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. I'd now like to focus at least my attention on Bangladesh's International Criminal Tribunal. And Mr. Sif, if I could start with you, if I could ask you, what actions might the U.S. government take at this point to urge the government of Bangladesh to bring the tribunal into compliance with international standards, assuming that they're not yet or aren't at this time, given the Bangladeshi government's unwillingness thus far to implement the recommendations of U.S. Ambassador for Global Criminal Justice Stephen Pratt, which were offered at the request of the Bangladeshi government a year and a half ago. What would your comment be on that?
So again, as with a lot of other issues, the patient isn't taking the medication, so it's very tough to know exactly what to do in that context. And that's the RAPID's made some very good recommendations. I feel that Human Rights Watch has made some very good recommendations, but they haven't been taken to heart. There's no leverage as there is with the Cambodian trade with funding, because there's no international funding for the trade. So there's very little left to do except continue insisting on it. One key thing that really drives home the reality is the depoliticization. It's one thing to talk about the shortcomings, procedural shortcomings of the tribunal. It's another to talk about the execution of defendants, the death penalty in a political context. And I think there is a place where the European Union, which proposed the death penalty, and the U.S., which has a renewal view, can get together and say that whether you support the death penalty or not, carrying out death sentences, executions, in a political context, either in the lead-up or the immediate aftermath of the elections, is a bad recipe for the perception that there's real justice going on. That's a warning that the EU and the United States can make together, and even India can say that.
Thank you. Let me ask any of the witnesses who'd like to comment on this. There have been reports about several disappearances of witnesses for the defense. One of them turned up apparently without explanation in an Indian jail. There are reports about the forced resignation of the Supreme Court Justice over, I believe, allegations of inappropriate conversations outside the courtroom with prosecutors, allegations about the defense being limited in one case to about 3 witnesses, and then the prosecution having far more witnesses than that. Are there any comments on those? Are those true? As far as we know, what concerns relative to fairness and international standards do that raise? Especially, as was indicated, when we're dealing with potential death sentences here. And I'd be happy to hear from any of the witnesses that might want to comment.
Just a quick factual point is that the Supreme Court Justice in question who resigned did not deny the allegations that he had improperly communicated with prosecutors. These were conversations that were intercepted by some means and given transcripts to the Economist magazine published. And in resigning, he never denied the substance of it. So those allegations are out there, they haven't been rebutted, and they're very, very serious. But I just want to factor the state.
Yeah, so they're not necessarily just allegations that this happened, at least in that case. Well, I guess the witnesses either were allowed 3 witnesses and the other side allowed 4, or the warrant. These are facts that could be determined independently, I'm assuming. But would any of the other witnesses like to comment on this? General?
Although there is widespread acceptance of the trial in Bangladesh by the Bangladesh citizens, but many Bangladeshis are not comfortable with the kind of standards that we maintain in the trial. Because to bring closure to a case of historical proportion, we have to have standards at the highest order of international standards of legal practices. The questions that Mr. Chairman pointed out were allegations which were not clarified by the government. So therefore, there is a wide perception that perhaps those happen. And if those are true, then even many citizens will become very uncomfortable when such sentences are going up to the level of death sentences passed against the people who are convicted. I think we, not only as citizens, but as international friends who observe the trials, we should continue to engage Bangladesh government in trying to encourage them to have high moral standards of international legal standards in the courts and practices.
Thank you very much. Doctor, did you want?
I would basically say that two things are there. Procedural, some of the procedural problems that we are seeing, of course, that needs to be recognized, and that the international engagement with the international crime tribunal need to be continued. However, at the same time, we need to put this in the historical context of Bangladesh. Over the past 40 years, these trials are also a matter of closure of the Bangladeshis of the past. This means to, in some ways, the nation was a victim. In 1971, and I personally don't consider it as a victim of one individual who was killed. The issue of war crime is largely related to the nation, and that's why it needs to be put in this historical context and understand why this was necessary and why there is a widespread support. So procedural questions notwithstanding, it should not be separated from the issue of justice for the victim, and here I see victim, the whole nation as a victim rather than individuals.
Thank you very much. My time has expired. I now recognize the chairman of the full Foreign Affairs Committee, Edward Rice, gentleman from California. Is recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to get down to the bottom line in terms of what has happened in Bangladesh and what I think is the underlying reason. I don't think it's dissimilar to what I've seen in Pakistan. In Pakistan, you have the Deobandi schools, and out of these particular 600 that we're most concerned about, are graduated young men who believe in jihadi philosophy. Now, they are able, because of their use of tactics of terror, to then move against a domestic population that maybe does not share their same views. And they usually target their wrath against, well, in Pakistan, it was Hindus and Christians and others. In Bangladesh today, if we go back to 1947, and we know a lot of this happened at the outset, but you have a total of 49 million Hindus missing from the rolls. Many of them, of course, went to India. But recently we have a situation where you've got 1,500 Hindu homes, 50 Hindu temples burned to the ground. But it's not just Hindus. It is also Christians. It is also atheists. It is also animists. It is those who do not take the most fundamental viewpoint. Now that's not most people in Bangladesh. It's a small percentage of the population. But it is that population that has been radicalized and has not been given an education, a wider, broader education. Indeed, the books that they study are not even in the Bengal language. They're not even in the Bangladeshi tongue. They're studying something that they don't even understand. They don't know it. So when they graduate, they don't know anything except what they've been brainwashed to believe, which is it's their mission to go out and try to force conversions. And they do that by oftentimes kidnapping girls, kidnapping women. They do that also by sowing terror. And we have a situation also where local police sometimes blame the Hindu population. Despite what I just described to you, all of that destruction. When that last came up, a mob of thousands descended on the Capitol, as you know. Thousands of radicals demanding a change in the Constitution, demanding that basically their views supersede the views of the wider community. But some police said, well, you know, we have a situation where the Hindus created some of the violence because they originally interfered with the construction of the mosque. Now, unless the state in Bangladesh is ready to come forward and close these particular Deobandi schools, the ones that have been identified as the most radical, the ones that are telling their charges, their graduates, to go out and commit this kind of violence, Pakistan, like Bangladesh, are going down roads here where the consequences will eventually engulf the state itself. You can see what's happening over in Pakistan when you don't confront And many, many times, we have raised this with officials inside Pakistan because we've seen the results. It's the same schools, right? It's the same movement. It's the same tactics. The results are going to be the same. You have a continued, effective removal of people who do not adhere to the views of the radicals. So, just a quick response, if you will, if you think my judgment is correct here, is this the wider, deeper problem?
The schools that you are referring to, the Devotee schools, there is a large number of them. Of course, this issue has been addressed in some way, not necessarily as robustly as it should. It should be reformed on the education sector, and more importantly, these are the schools which are, the madrasas which are producing youth who are not exactly able to participate in the economic activity. So there needs to be a reform, but at this point, I would say this is a small number. And whether Bangladesh will travel past Pakistan has already traveled depends on the political will and overall political circumstances as well. And that is where I see this instability in Bangladesh contributing to this kind of situation.
Well, you're down to a Hindu population that's now 8.5%.
Absolutely.
And on an ongoing basis, we see the flight of minority populations. So the government is not doing enough to protect them. And part of that protection is to do something about this.
I completely agree with you, Congressman. And there has been structural issues. The Bangladeshi population, if we look into the area from 1951, it has been, the really big population, which I call the missing millions. And the state has never done what it should be doing. And irrespective of the Communist Party in power, the Bangladeshi state has failed to protect its minority. Not only the Hindus, they have seen this situation in the Buddhist population, in the realm of that what we have seen. This is absolutely a terrible situation that we are living. Unless the state steps up and protect it, and that is why when Congressman asked about the issue of post-election violence, these are the most popular populations that we see, and they become the first target of this kind of situation. So not only in the context of the election, overall, these are the issues that need to be addressed. I would urge the international community to work closely, not only the Bangladesh government, but the civil society, to make sure that these things are not repeated. We have seen it enough, and at some point, Bangladeshis and its partners and its well-wishers to stand up and say, enough is enough. And this is the time we should say, enough is enough.
Thank you, Governor. I appreciate it.
The gentleman's comment. The gentlelady from Hawaii is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I appreciate our full committee chairman's remarks and really taking the long view of this and looking at the root causes of these problems that we're seeing and think it has to be included in this conversation. I wanted to pick up a little bit further on the issue of the tribunals. Despite the obvious flaws with the tribunals, clearly this is an issue of bringing about justice 40 years later that is absolutely necessary for these heinous acts of violence against humanity. A little bit of a two-part question. It's my understanding that there was violence against Hindus and other minorities after recent rulings by the Crime Tribunal convicting some of these prominent leaders who were complicit in 1971 attacks. If you could talk to me about how the government responded to these attacks in any way, if they did, and what more could be done to reduce them further, as well as what other forms of justice can be brought about for the families of the over 3 million victims of the massacres during that 1971 liberation movement. You can start, Dr. Rio.
Thank you. In regard to the violence that we have seen post-verdict throughout the whole country, there have not been any effective measures from the government. And unfortunately, the government not only failed to protect them, subsequently the government has not provided any support. The lip service is all that we have seen, same we have seen from the opposition party. So at this point, it is we cannot simply wait and see what the government is going to do. It is more important that the civil society, particularly those NGOs who are active in the rural areas, they need to work very closely in somehow preventing those kind of things. Instead of waiting until the next thing happens, it needs to be preempted rather than post-event some sort of support. So that is an issue that going forward, whatever form of election and post-election situations are there, it is not only about today, it's not about tomorrow. There has to be some kind of engagement, and it is an international support that Congress needs, and civil society needs to be included in this. As for the International Crime Tribunal, as I have mentioned, and as Congressman, you have mentioned, it is about the justice. And the heinous crime that has been perpetrated 42 years ago, the nation became a victim, and there has to be justice. And this cannot be simply seen as a procedural matter of one trial at a time. I think it is a matter of historical proportion, and that is why when we are talking about this 3 million people who have been killed, millions have been suffered, millions have suffered, all things need to be taken into account. And there need to be a closure, and that is what this trial is all about. That's how I see it. That's my opinion. I have reservations about the trial process.
In the violence that took place against minorities, not only Hindus, but particularly also against Buddhists in the Ram temple area, the government completely failed to protect minority rights and the property in their lives. But I would also like to mention here that minority casualties and violence did not only take place by Islamic elements in Bangladesh. It was a result of the very confrontational nature of politics between the two parties. So therefore, a lot of violence were perpetrated by both the parties. In some of the instances, there were press reports evidence that the violence against the Hindus in the Papa district recently was carried out